Sherlock Holmes and the Secret of the Haunted Carousel. Chapter 1. The Strange Affair at Blackwood Fair. The autumn of 1887 brought with it a peculiar chill that penetrated London's very stones. I found myself once again sharing quarters with my remarkable friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, at our Baker Street lodgings. Holmes had been particularly restless of late. 3 weeks had passed since his brilliant resolution of the Baskerville affair, and the absence of stimulating cases had driven him to the cocaine bottle more frequently than I cared to witness. His keen mind required constant challenge. Without it, it turned inward with alarming ferocity. That morning I descended to find Holmes already awake, drawing discordant notes from his violin beside the window. "Ah, Watson," he remarked without turning. "I trust you slept well, though I cannot say the same for Inspector Lestrade. The poor man has been pacing outside our door for nearly 20 minutes. The bell rang sharply, and moments later Lestrade burst into our sitting room, face ashen and appearance disheveled. "Mr. Holmes," he gasped, "I would not disturb you if the matter were not most urgent and entirely beyond my powers of explanation." Holmes set aside his violin, lethargy instantly evaporating. "Pray, take a seat, Inspector. Watson, I believe this may be worthy of your chronicles." "It's the strangest affair I've encountered in 15 years with the Yard," Lestrade began. "A man has been found dead at Blackwood Fair, on London's outskirts." "Murder is hardly unprecedented," Holmes remarked, reaching for his pipe. "It's not the death itself, but the circumstances. Edward Thornfield, proprietor of the fair's Carousel, was discovered this morning impaled upon one of the brass poles that support the wooden horses. The Carousel was fully operational when the fair opened. Attendants claim it had been running nearly an hour before anyone noticed blood dripping from beneath the platform." Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "And what makes this case so perplexing that you seek my assistance?" "Two things. First, Thornfield was wearing evening clothes, though seen earlier in work attire. Second, his face bore an expression of pure terror, and clutched in his hand was this." Lestrade produced a small envelope with a broken red wax seal, revealing a card inside bearing a single sentence. "The Carousel claims what is rightfully its own." Holmes examined the card closely. High-quality cardstock, Prussian blue ink rather than common black. The handwriting is deliberate, almost ceremonial, not written in haste. He held it to his nose. "Curious. A faint scent of oil paint and something mechanical." "There's more," Lestrade continued. "The Carousel is said to be haunted. 3 people have died in accidents involving it over the past decade. The coincidence becomes difficult to ignore when another corpse appears," Holmes finished, reaching for his coat. "Watson, this promises to be a case of singular interest." At Blackwood Fair, constables kept onlookers at bay around the central plaza where the notorious Carousel stood. The elaborate construction of polished wood, brass, and mirrors glittered dully in the morning light. 12 intricately carved horses mounted on brass poles surrounded smaller figures of mythical creatures and exotic animals. Despite its beauty, something unsettling hung about the Carousel as it stood motionless. Perhaps knowledge of the gruesome discovery within, or something more intangible. Holmes examined the spot where Thornfield was found, a section of partially dismantled platform revealing complex machinery beneath. "The blood pattern suggests Thornfield was already dead when placed here," Holmes observed, magnifying glass in hand. "Death occurred elsewhere, and the body was arranged deliberately." "How can you possibly know that?" Lestrade demanded. "The blood distribution, Inspector. Had Thornfield been alive when impaled, the arterial spray would have created a distinctly different pattern." Holmes continued examining the Carousel, noting drag marks on the platform and evidence of tampering with the control mechanism. His attention suddenly fixed on one carved horse, a black stallion with red glass eyes. "This horse is different. The craftsmanship is identical, but the paint is newer." A commotion interrupted us. A woman in purple arguing with constables at the fairground's edge. "I must speak with whoever is in charge. I have information about Edward's death." As she approached, I noted she was perhaps 30, with striking features and an amber pendant shaped like a carousel horse. "Gentlemen," she announced, "my name is Madame Irina Vasilenko. I am a clairvoyant with Blackwood Fair, and I know why. Edward Thornfield died." Holmes regarded her skeptically. "And what supernatural insights can you offer?" "Not supernatural, Mr. Holmes, historical. The Carousel is cursed by its past, which Edward was researching despite my warnings." She fingered her pendant nervously. "Edward came to me 3 days ago, troubled by dreams. He showed me documents. The Carousel's original provenance dating to Vienna in 1853. He believed it held a secret worth killing for." "What secret?" Holmes asked, his interest clearly piqued. "The Carousel once belonged to the Habsburg royal family. Edward believed something of immense value was hidden within it, something certain parties would go to great lengths to recover." As she spoke, Holmes's attention shifted to something behind her. Following his gaze, I saw a tall, gaunt man watching us from the shadow of a nearby tent. Upon realizing he had been spotted, the figure disappeared into the fairground's labyrinth. Holmes sprinted after him, but the observer had vanished by the time we caught up. Holmes pointed to a single footprint visible in soft earth. A man of considerable height with an unusual gait. He puts more weight on the outside edge of his right foot, suggesting an old injury. "It seems our investigation has already attracted attention," Holmes remarked thoughtfully. "The game is afoot, Watson. Let us return to Madame Vasilenko and hear more of this Habsburg connection." As we walked back, I could not shake the feeling of being observed from the shadows. And beneath it all, I swore I could hear the faint melody of "The Blue Danube," despite the Carousel standing silent before us. Chapter 2. The Clairvoyant's Warning. When we returned to the Carousel, Madame Vasilenko was examining the black stallion that had caught Holmes's attention earlier. Her fingers traced the contours of its wooden mane with a familiarity that suggested she had done so many times before. "This was Edward's favorite," she said without turning. "He called it Kaiser and insisted no child should ride it. He always said it was waiting for its rightful owner to return." Holmes approached silently, his keen eyes studying her reactions. "You mentioned documents proving Habsburg ownership. Where are they now?" She withdrew her hand from the stallion, as though suddenly aware of impropriety. "In Edward's quarters, I presume." He lived in a wagon at the eastern edge of the fairground, a converted Romani caravan painted blue with gold trim. "You cannot miss it." "And did these documents specify what treasure might be hidden within the Carousel?" Holmes inquired, his tone casual, though I knew his interest was anything but. Madame Vasilenko's hand moved unconsciously to her amber pendant. He showed me a letter written in German, correspondence between a Habsburg duchess and the Carousel's maker. It mentioned Das Geschenk des Kaisers, the emperor's gift, concealed within the central mechanism. Edward believed it was jewelry, of significant value, perhaps from the Austrian crown jewels. Holmes exchanged a meaningful glance with me. "Watson, I believe it would be prudent to examine Thornfield's quarters before any opportunistic souls decide to conduct their own investigation." "Too late, I fear," Lestrade interjected, returning from a conversation with one of his constables. "I've just been informed that Thornfield's wagon was broken into last night. The place has been thoroughly ransacked." Holmes' expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Then we must see it at once. The manner of searching often reveals more about the searcher than the object of their search." He turned back to Madame Vasilenko. "Did Thornfield mention speaking to anyone else about his discovery?" "Only the Carousel maker's grandson, Herr Wilhelm Schröder. He arrived from Vienna 3 days ago, claiming to be a historian researching vintage fairground attractions. Edward was initially delighted to meet him but became suspicious after their second meeting." He told me the man asked too many questions about the mechanical workings rather than the artistic elements. Is this Schroeder still at the fair? Holmes asked sharply. He has taken lodgings at the Silver Horse Inn, half a mile down the road. He's elderly but remarkably spry, tall and thin with a pronounced stoop. Holmes's eyes narrowed. With a peculiar gait, perhaps, favoring his right foot? Madame Vasilenko looked surprised. Yes, he walks with an unusual swagger. How did you know? A fortunate conjecture, Holmes replied, though I recognized the gleam in his eye. Watson, I believe our investigation now has two immediate avenues. Thornfield's ransacked quarters, and a conversation with Herr Schroeder. But first, he turned to the carousel once more, kneeling to examine the central column from which the brass poles radiated like spokes. Curious, the central mechanism appears to have been modified recently. The screws show fresh tool marks. He withdrew a small measuring tape from his pocket and made several calculations, muttering to himself. The dimensions are irregular. The outer circumference matches the standard Viennese design of the period, but the interior column is disproportionately thick, creating a hollow space approximately 6 inches in width between the visible column and the mechanical core. A hiding place? I suggested. Precisely, Watson. A circular compartment large enough to conceal something of considerable value. He rapped his knuckles against different sections of the column, his head tilted as he listened to the subtle variations in sound. This section has been opened recently. The wood's resonance differs markedly. Holmes produced a small folding knife and carefully worked it into an almost invisible seam in the decorative molding. With a soft click, a panel swung open, revealing a narrow compartment within. He reached inside, his expression changing from anticipation to puzzlement. Empty, he announced, withdrawing his hand. Yet the dust pattern suggests something cylindrical was removed quite recently. Within the last 48 hours, I should estimate. The Emperor's gift? Lestrade asked. Perhaps, though one would expect something more secure than this relatively accessible hiding place for an item of genuine historical value. Holmes closed the panel carefully. No, this may have held documents, rather than treasure. Perhaps the very papers Thornfield showed to Madame Vasilenko. We proceeded to Thornfield's quarters at the eastern edge of the fairground. The wagon was indeed distinctive. A beautifully preserved caravan with faded blue paint and elaborate gold scrollwork adorning its sides. Its door hung askew on broken hinges, and a constable stood guard outside. The interior presented a scene of methodical destruction. Drawers had been emptied onto the floor, the mattress slashed open, and even the floorboards pried up in several places. What struck me most was not the thoroughness of the search, but its precision. This was no random act of vandalism, but a calculated effort to locate something specific. Holmes moved through the chaos with practiced ease, touching nothing but observing everything. Our searcher was interrupted, he noted, pointing to a half-emptied chest. They began methodically, but finished in haste. Notice how the earlier drawers were emptied systematically, while these last few were simply upended. His attention was drawn to a small writing desk whose lock had been forced. This is where Thornfield kept his important papers. Holmes examined the splintered wood carefully. The lock was opened with a thin blade, a professional job. "Mr. Holmes?" called the constable from outside. "You might want to see this, sir." We stepped outside to find the young officer holding a crumpled sheet of paper he had discovered beneath the wagon. Holmes smoothed it carefully, revealing a rough sketch of the carousel's central column with detailed annotations in German. "Technical specifications," Holmes murmured. "Measurements and mechanical notes about the central column's construction." Thornfield was an engineer after all. He turned the paper over. "And what have we here?" A partially written letter. He read aloud. "My dear Wilhelm, I have discovered the truth about the carousel and the significance of the Black Horse. If you still maintain that your family's Claim is legitimate. We must meet tonight at... And there it ends, unfinished. Wilhelm? As in Wilhelm Schroeder? I asked. Indeed, Watson. It seems our visit to the Silver Horse Inn becomes increasingly urgent. Holmes carefully folded the paper and placed it in his pocket. But first, one last examination of the carousel itself. I am particularly interested in this black horse that features so prominently in our investigation. As we returned to the central plaza, an eerie silence had fallen over the fairground. The constables had cleared the area of onlookers, leaving the carousel standing in isolated splendor, its painted horses seeming to watch us with glass eyes that held secrets of their own. Holmes approached the black stallion with intense concentration, running his hands over its polished surface. The craftsmanship is exquisite, but as I noted earlier, this horse has been restored more recently than the others. His fingers probed the seams and joints of the wooden figure. There's something unusual about its weight distribution. He pressed firmly against various points on the horse's side until a soft click emanated from within. With delicate precision, Holmes rotated the horse's head a quarter turn to the right. A small compartment opened in its neck, revealing a velvet-lined cavity. "Empty," Holmes announced, disappointment evident in his voice. Yet something was kept here. Something small enough to fit in this compartment but valuable enough to kill. 4. "Perhaps the Emperor's gift?" I suggested. "Perhaps," Holmes agreed, carefully closing the compartment. "Or perhaps the key to finding it." He straightened, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the carousel once more. "This case grows more intriguing by the moment. I believe our next move is clear. We must speak with Herr Wilhelm Schroeder without delay and discover what connection his family has to this carousel and its secrets." As we departed the fairground, I cast one last glance back at the silent carousel. For an instant, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move among the painted horses, a tall, thin figure that vanished as quickly as it appeared. And once again, drifting faintly on the autumn breeze, came the ghostly strains of the Blue Danube, though the carousel remained motionless in the gathering dusk. Chapter 3. The Silver Horse Inn. The Silver Horse Inn stood at a crossroads half a mile from the fairground. A centuries-old coaching house whose weathered sign depicting a prancing silver steed creaked in the evening breeze. The establishment bore all the hallmarks of rural England: low-beamed ceilings, uneven floors, and the pervasive scent of ale and wood smoke. Holmes paused outside, surveying the building. 15 rooms, I should estimate. 2 entrances. Note the fresh mud on the threshold, Watson. Several people have entered within the last hour despite the limited patronage. Inside, we found the common room sparsely populated. A few local farmers, a traveling salesman, and a red-faced innkeeper polishing glasses behind the bar. The latter looked up as we entered, his expression shifting as Lestrade followed us through the door. "Looking for the Austrian gentleman, I expect," the innkeeper said before we could speak. "Room 6, at the top of the stairs. Though you've just missed him. Went out not 20 minutes ago, carrying a small valise. Seemed in quite a hurry." Holmes's expression tightened. "Did he mention where he was going?" "Not to me, sir, but he did receive a visitor shortly before departing. A lady in purple. Madame Vasilenko," I murmured to Holmes, who nodded curtly. "And after this visit, he left immediately?" "As good as. Came down those stairs like a man 20 years younger. Paid his bill in full, including 2 more nights he'd already arranged for, and said something about catching the evening train." Holmes turned to Lestrade. "Inspector, I suggest you telegraph to all stations within 30 miles. Herr Schroeder must not leave England until we've had the opportunity to question him." "On what grounds, Mr. Holmes?" Lestrade asked, though he was already reaching for his notebook. "His precipitous departure following Madame Vasilenko's visit suggests knowledge he is unwilling to share. Request that he be detained as a material witness." That should suffice until we determine his true involvement. As Lestrade departed to send his telegrams, Holmes persuaded the innkeeper with a sovereign to let us examine Schroeder's room. Room 6 was meticulously tidy. Bed made, wash basin emptied, no personal items in sight. The only indication of recent occupation was a faint scent of Austrian tobacco. He took everything of importance, Holmes observed, but perhaps overlooked something in his haste. He began a systematic examination, checking beneath the mattress, inside the chamber pot, and behind the slightly askew painting. "Ah!" he exclaimed softly, reaching behind the wardrobe. His fingers emerged, holding a crumpled ball of paper. Carelessness, born of urgency. He carefully smoothed the paper to reveal a railway timetable with annotations in precise German handwriting. He circled the 8:45 to London, with a connection noted for the Dover packet tomorrow morning. Our Austrian friend plans to leave England entirely. Holmes knelt suddenly to study the floorboards beneath the window. "Observe these scratches, Watson. Something heavy was placed here, recently, judging by the freshness of the marks." "The valise the innkeeper mentioned?" "No, something heavier and with a distinctive circular base." Holmes traced the outline. "Approximately 12 inches in diameter. A display stand, perhaps, or a small safe." Lestrade reappeared, slightly breathless. "Telegrams dispatched to all stations within 30 miles, Mr. Holmes. But there's been a development. A porter at Blackwood Station recalls a gentleman matching Schroeder's description, boarding the 7:15 local train. That was over an hour ago." Holmes consulted his pocket watch with a slight frown. "The 7:15 connects with the London Express at Millfield Junction. If he makes that connection, he'll reach London well before any of your telegrams can arrange an interception. Then he's escaped us," Lestrade sighed. "Perhaps, though I suspect not entirely by design." Holmes examined the timetable again. "These annotations suggest he originally planned to take the later train. Something prompted him to alter his schedule. Madame Vasilenko's visit, presumably. Our search yielded little until Holmes discovered a small brass key beneath the bed. Victorian manufacture, but well maintained. Not for a door, too small. A lockbox, perhaps, or a drawer." As Holmes pocketed this find, a disturbance erupted downstairs. Raised voices, followed by breaking glass. We hurried down to discover Madame Vasilenko engaged in a heated exchange with the innkeeper. Upon seeing us, she immediately approached. "He's taken it," she declared without preamble. "Wilhelm Schroeder has stolen the Emperor's gift." "You know this for certain?" Holmes inquired, guiding her to a quiet corner. "I came to warn him that his life might be in danger, that whoever killed Edward might target him next." He seemed genuinely shocked by Edward's death, but when I mentioned the Black Horse's secret compartment, his manner changed entirely. He admitted knowing of its existence but claimed it was empty when he examined it 3 days ago. "And you believe he was lying?" "I know he was. Edward showed me what he found inside just yesterday morning. A small golden cylinder with the Habsburg crest engraved upon its surface. He believed it contained a key or a document revealing the location of the true treasure." Holmes leaned forward. "And the last time you saw this golden cylinder was when Thornfield showed it to you?" She nodded. "Edward returned it to its hiding place in the horse. He intended to bring Wilhelm to see it last night, but obviously..." She trailed off, fingers nervously tracing her amber pendant. "When you visited Schroeder earlier, did he have a small valise with him?" Holmes asked suddenly. "Yes, packed and ready beside the door. He claimed he was planning to catch the evening train to London." Her eyes widened with sudden understanding. "He was already preparing to flee. Not flee, perhaps, but certainly to depart with some urgency." Holmes's expression was thoughtful. "You mentioned that Thornfield and Schroeder had arranged to meet last night. Do you know the intended location?" "At the Carousel, after the fair closed. Edward wanted to show him how the mechanism had been modified to create the hiding place." She hesitated. "There's something else." When I mentioned Edward's death to Wilhelm, he seemed shocked but not surprised, if that makes sense, as though he had feared something of the sort might happen. Holmes exchanged a significant glance with me. I believe we must return to the fairground immediately. If Schroeder has indeed taken this golden cylinder, he may not be our murderer, but rather another target. The true killer may still be searching for the Emperor's gift. As we prepared to depart, the innkeeper approached with a sealed envelope. Nearly forgot in all the commotion. The Austrian gentleman left this for anyone inquiring after him. Holmes broke the plain wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, bearing a hastily written message. The carousel holds one final secret. Look to where the music plays. W.S. Cryptic, yet suggestive, Holmes murmured. It seems Herr Schroeder has left us a parting gift, a clue to the ultimate mystery of the haunted carousel. As we stepped outside, the distant sound of fairground music drifted through the gathering darkness, the unmistakable waltz melody of the Blue Danube, though the hour was late and the fair surely closed. Holmes paused, his head tilted as he listened. "The carousel calls to us, Watson," he said quietly, "and I believe it is time we answered." Chapter 4. Where the music plays. The fairground presented an altogether different aspect in darkness. What had seemed merely eccentric by daylight now assumed a more sinister character. Canvas tents billowing like spectral forms, painted attractions, leering in the moonlight, and shadows that seemed to move with purposes of their own. The constables Lestrade had posted at the entrance had drawn together near their lantern, seeking comfort in proximity against the unnatural music that continued to emanate from the central plaza. "It's been playing for nearly an hour, sir," one reported nervously. "Started up all on its own, it did. None of us would go near it, begging your pardon. But there's something not right about that carousel." Holmes strode past them without comment, his tall figure cutting a determined path through the fairground shadows. I followed close behind, Lestrade at my side, and Madame Vasilenko trailing with evident reluctance. The carousel stood as we had left it, yet utterly transformed by moonlight and music. The painted horses seemed alive, their glass eyes gleaming with an inner light as the melody of the Blue Danube filled the air. Yet the structure remained motionless, the music playing, without the accompanying rotation that should have powered the mechanical organ. "Most curious," Holmes murmured, circling the carousel with measured steps. "The music mechanism is clearly operational, yet the drive system remains disengaged. Perhaps someone activated only the organ," I suggested. "Impossible, Watson. The two systems are interconnected. The same steam engine that rotates the platform powers the organ through a series of gears and cams. One cannot function without the other, unless—" Holmes paused, his attention drawn to the control pedestal. "Unless the mechanism has been deliberately modified." He knelt beside the ornate brass pedestal that housed the carousel's controls, his fingers tracing the decorative scrollwork with evident purpose. "Ah, as I suspected." With a precise application of pressure, a small panel sprang open, revealing a complex arrangement of gears and a keyed access point. Holmes withdrew the brass key we had discovered in Schroeder's room and held it up to the moonlight. "A perfect match in design and period. Let us see if it serves its purpose." The key slid into the lock with satisfying precision. Holmes turned it carefully, and with a soft click, a secondary panel opened within the first. Behind it was a small, brass crank, which Holmes began to rotate with deliberate care. As he did so, the music grew louder, and the carousel's central column began to turn. Not the platform with its horses, but only the innermost cylinder that housed the mechanical organ. The rotation revealed something none of us had observed before. A series of small brass studs embedded in the column's surface, arranged in a spiral pattern that caught the moonlight as it turned. "A secondary control system," Holmes explained, continuing to crank steadily. The music plays, but the carousel remains stationary, most ingenious, and quite deliberate in its design. With each rotation, the spiral pattern ascended higher. After the third complete turn, there came a decisive click, and a section of the column's decorative molding swung outward like a door. Within the revealed cavity sat a small wooden box, unremarkable save for the Habsburg double eagle inlaid in its lid. Holmes removed the box with careful hands and brought it to a nearby bench, where he placed it beneath one of the fairground lanterns. We gathered around as he examined it without opening it. Austrian craftsmanship, circa 1850, he noted. The wood is apple wood, traditionally used for items of value in Vienna. The lock is gold-plated brass, but curiously, there is no keyhole, only this circular depression in the center. Madame Vasilenko leaned forward, her amber pendant swinging into the light. The golden cylinder, that must be the key Edward found, which Schroeder has presumably taken with him to London, Lestrade sighed. Perhaps, Holmes replied, his tone non-committal. He turned the box over, studying its construction with his magnifying glass. Interesting. There appears to be a secondary mechanism. The base has been modified more recently than the original construction. Observe the difference in patina between the wood of the lid and the base. With careful fingers, Holmes pressed against various points on the box's underside until another, soft click rewarded his efforts. The bottom panel slid aside, revealing a hidden compartment containing a folded parchment sealed with red wax bearing the Habsburg crest. A document rather than jewels, I remarked as Holmes carefully broke the seal and unfolded the aged parchment. Indeed, though its value may exceed that of mere gemstones. Holmes held the document to the light, his eyes scanning the elegant script. It is written in German, dated 1853, and signed by Archduke Franz Karl of Austria. Can you translate it? Lestrade asked impatiently. Certainly. It reads, "To the bearer of this document, I confirm the lawful transfer of the item known as the Emperor's Star from the Habsburg treasury to the possession of Karl Schroeder, master craftsman, in recognition of services rendered to the Imperial's family. This sapphire, once worn by Empress Maria Theresa, is hereby removed from the official inventory of crown jewels and may be disposed of as Herr Schroeder sees fit, without interference from any agent of the crown or state." A sapphire, Madame Vasilenko breathed. Not just any jewel, but one worn by the Empress herself. Which explains much, Holmes continued. The carousel was commissioned as a means of smuggling the jewel out of Austria. The black horse, Kaiser, must have contained the sapphire within its structure. But where is this Emperor's Star now? Lestrade demanded. If Thornfield found it, could that be what got him killed? I think not, Holmes replied. The evidence suggests Thornfield found only the golden cylinder in the horse, a key to this box, which in turn contained this document of provenance. The sapphire itself must still be hidden somewhere within the carousel's structure. Or perhaps Schroeder already retrieved it, I suggested. That could explain his hasty departure. Holmes shook his head. If he had found the sapphire, why leave this document behind? No, I believe Schroeder, like Thornfield before him, discovered only part of the puzzle. The true location of the Emperor's Star remains hidden. He returned his attention to the parchment, turning it over to examine its reverse side. Ah, there is more. A sequence of numbers, written in a different hand than the main document, likely added later. 12, 7, 4, 9, 1. A code of some sort, perhaps coordinates within the carousel structure. Holmes folded the document carefully and placed it in his pocket. I believe we should proceed with caution. If Thornfield was murdered for getting too close to this secret, we may be placing ourselves in similar danger, as if in response to his words. The carousel's music abruptly ceased, leaving an unnatural silence that seemed to press against our ears. In that silence, the distinct click of a revolver being cocked sounded behind us. I'll take that document, Mr. Holmes. came a cultured voice with the barest trace of a continental accent. "Along with the box. My employer has waited long enough to reclaim what rightfully belongs to the Habsburg family." We turned to find ourselves confronted by a thin, elegantly dressed man, holding a pearl-handled revolver with unwavering precision. His hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes confirmed him as the observer who had fled from the fairground earlier. "Count Victor Esterhazy, I presume?" Holmes said calmly. "The Habsburg agent who has been pursuing this matter since the Carousel arrived in England." The man's surprise was momentary but unmistakable. "You have me at a disadvantage, Mr. Holmes. My reputation apparently precedes me." "Hardly. Your signet ring bears the Esterhazy crest, and your accent places you as Hungarian nobility educated. In Vienna, the connection was elementary." Esterhazy's thin lips curved into a cold smile. "How refreshingly observant. Now the document, if you please. I have no desire to add to the regrettable body count this affair has already accumulated." "You killed Thornfield," Madame Vasilenko accused, her voice trembling with anger. "A necessary action," Esterhazy replied without remorse. "He refused to cooperate after discovering the cylinder, but I assure you, his death was far quicker than what awaits anyone who continues to interfere with my mission." Holmes met the man's gaze steadily. "The Emperor's star is no longer property of the Habsburg family. The document clearly transfers ownership to Karl Schroeder. A theft concealed by bureaucracy," Esterhazy snapped. "The sapphire was removed under duress during the revolutions of 1848. The document merely formalized a crime against the imperial treasury. A wrong I have been commissioned to right." He gestured impatiently with his revolver. "Enough conversation. The document, Mr. Holmes. Now." Chapter 5. A Game of Shadows. The night air hung heavy with tension as Count Esterhazy's revolver gleamed in the moonlight. Holmes remained remarkably composed, his gray eyes studying our adversary with the same analytical detachment he might apply to an unusual chemical reaction. "A fascinating predicament," Holmes observed, making no move toward his pocket where the document rested. "You claim to represent Habsburg interests, yet you operate alone, without official sanction. Your clothing is of excellent quality, but shows signs of extended wear. Your boots have been resoled twice. You are a nobleman fallen on hard times, Count Esterhazy, gambling on this recovery to restore your fortunes." A flicker of anger crossed the Count's aristocratic features. "Your deductions, while impressive, are irrelevant. The document, Mr. Holmes? My patience wanes. And if I refuse?" Esterhazy's thin smile did not reach his eyes. "Then I shall be forced to collect it from your corpse. Beginning with you, and proceeding through your companions until someone demonstrates wisdom." I tensed, gauging the distance between us. My service revolver was in my pocket, but any movement toward it would surely provoke immediate violence. Lestrade stood rigid beside me, while Madame Vasilenko had gone deathly pale. "A crude approach," Holmes replied with surprising equanimity. "Violence so often complicates matters unnecessarily. For instance, have you considered that killing us would attract significant attention from Scotland Yard? Inspector Lestrade is, after all, a respected officer who has conveniently joined me in a remote location at night," Esterhazy countered. "Bodies can be concealed, Mr. Holmes. The Carousel has already proven itself adept at hiding secrets." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed. Speaking of secrets, I wonder if you've interpreted the numerical sequence correctly. The code on the document's reverse." This gave Esterhazy pause. "What do you know of it?" "Only that it is incomplete as written. The full sequence contains 2 additional numbers that would lead you to the Emperor's star. Without them, you would search the Carousel in vain, perhaps dismantling it entirely without success." I recognized Holmes's stratagem immediately, a bold bluff designed to buy time. Esterhazy's hesitation suggested it was working. "You're lying," he said, though uncertainty. had crept into his voice. "The sequence is sufficient." "Is it?" Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Then you'll have already determined that it does not refer to measurements or coordinates, but rather to the horses themselves. Numbered in sequence around the carousel, they form a pattern that reveals the true hiding place." Esterhazy's gun wavered slightly. "How could you possibly know this?" "Elementary deduction. The document was written in 1853, yet the numerical sequence was added later in different ink. Carl Schroeder wouldn't need a written reminder of his own creation's secret. The numbers were added by a descendant, Wilhelm perhaps, who feared the knowledge might otherwise be lost." Holmes took a calculated half-step forward. "I propose an arrangement, Count. Allow my friends to depart unharmed, and I shall reveal the complete sequence. You gain the sapphire without bloodshed. I preserve innocent lives. A fair exchange." Esterhazy's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "And why would you offer such generosity?" "Because, unlike you, I have no personal stake in this treasure. Historical curiosities interest me. Unnecessary deaths do not." A tense silence fell as Esterhazy considered the proposal. During this momentary impasse, a subtle movement at the periphery of my vision caught my attention. A shadow detaching itself from the darkness behind the carousel. "Very well," Esterhazy finally conceded. "Your companions may go. You remain until I have the sapphire in hand." Holmes nodded to us. "Watson, escort Madame Vasilenko and the inspector away from the fairground. I shall join you shortly." "Holmes, I cannot possibly—" I began to protest. "Please, Watson, this is the most logical solution." The look he gave me contained a message I could not immediately decipher. Nevertheless, I reluctantly began guiding Madame Vasilenko toward the fairground entrance, Lestrade following with obvious reluctance. We had scarcely gone 20 paces when a sharp whistle pierced the night. Esterhazy whirled toward the sound, a critical moment of distraction. Holmes moved with surprising speed, knocking the revolver upward as it discharged harmlessly into the air. The two men grappled briefly before a new figure burst from the shadows, colliding with Esterhazy and sending all three sprawling to the ground. In the confusion, I rushed back, drawing my own revolver. By the time I reached them, Holmes had already subdued Esterhazy with a precise blow to the temple, rendering him unconscious. The newcomer rose unsteadily to his feet, an elderly man with a distinguished bearing despite his disheveled appearance. "Herr Wilhelm Schroeder, I presume?" Holmes inquired, dusting himself off. The old man nodded, breathing heavily from the exertion. I could not leave knowing Esterhazy was still hunting. His English was impeccable, with only the slightest Germanic inflection. "I doubled back after reaching London, traveling by private coach. I feared I might be too late." "A timely intervention," Holmes acknowledged. Though I had matters well in hand, I exchanged a knowing glance with Lestrade. Holmes's confidence, as ever, remained unshaken regardless of circumstances. With Esterhazy secured, Lestrade efficiently binding his hands with a spare pair of handcuffs, we gathered once more around the bench where the Habsburg box still lay. "You found the document," Schroeder observed, his weathered hand caressing the wooden box with evident emotion. "My grandfather's vindication after all these years." "Indeed," Holmes replied, "though the Emperor's star itself remains elusive. Perhaps you might illuminate the meaning of these numbers?" He produced the parchment, indicating the sequence on its reverse. Schroeder studied it with a sad smile. "My father's edition, 127491. They are indeed the positions of certain horses on the carousel, as you somehow deduced. But this sequence alone is insufficient. There are 2 more numbers," Holmes stated with certainty. The old man looked up in surprise. "How could you know?" "The sequence as written creates a pentagram pattern when mapped to the carousel's 12 positions. Such a pattern requires 6 points to complete the geometric figure, suggesting a missing 6th number. Furthermore, the existing 5 numbers All fall within the range of 1 to 12, the total number of horses. Mathematically, the missing number must be either 6, 8, 10, or 11 to maintain the pattern's symmetry. Schroeder shook his head in amazement. Remarkable! You are correct, Mr. Holmes. The complete sequence is 12-7-4-9-1-6. Together, they form a perfect hexagram when traced between the horses. And the center of this hexagram indicates the hiding place of the sapphire, Holmes concluded. Not exactly. Schroeder's expression grew solemn. The pattern is a key, not a map. When the 6 horses are pressed in the correct sequence, a mechanism is triggered. He approached the carousel, moving directly to the black stallion, Kaiser. This horse was my grandfather's masterpiece, containing not just one hiding place, but 2. With practiced movements, Schroeder pressed the horse's glass eyes in sequence, first right, then left. The wooden neck hinged open, revealing not a cavity, but a small brass dial with 12 numbered positions. The 6 numbers must be entered in reverse order, Schroeder explained. 6, 1, 9, 4, 7, 12. As he rotated the dial to each position, we heard the faint click of internal mechanisms engaging. After the final number, a more substantial click emanated from the carousel's central column. The decorative crown that topped the structure had rotated slightly, revealing a small aperture. The Emperor's star, Schroeder said softly, has been hiding in plain sight all these years, incorporated into the very crown of the carousel. Visible to all, yet recognized by none. Holmes retrieved a small footstool from nearby, allowing Schroeder to reach the column's top. With trembling fingers, the old man extracted a large blue gemstone from within the ornamental crown. The sapphire caught the moonlight, its deep azure, depths seeming to hold the very essence of midnight within. Magnificent, breathed Madame Vasilenko. A jewel fit for an empress, and rightfully the property of the Schroeder family for over 3 decades, Holmes noted. As the Habsburg document legally confirms. Schroeder cradled the sapphire reverently. My grandfather never sold it, despite financial hardships after leaving Austria. He considered it a matter of honor to preserve what had been entrusted to him. He built this carousel as both hiding place and memorial to his royal patronage. And now the carousel has claimed its final victim, I observed, glancing toward the still unconscious Esterhazy. Not its final victim, I fear, Schroeder said grimly. Esterhazy does not work alone. Chapter 6. The Countess's Gambit. Esterhazy does not work alone. Schroeder's words hung in the air like the fairground mist that had begun to gather around us. The Habsburg interest in recovering the Emperor's star extends beyond a single agent. Holmes' eyes narrowed. You refer to Countess Helena Esterhazy, the Count's sister and the true architect of this pursuit. The old man's surprise was evident. How could you possibly know that? The letter we found in Thornfield's quarters mentioned correspondence with a Lady H, who expressed interest in acquiring the carousel. Furthermore, the Count's pocket watch, which I observed during our confrontation, bears an engraving of 2 sets of initials, VE and HE. Siblings often share such heirlooms during times of financial distress. Schroeder nodded grimly. The Countess is infinitely more dangerous than her brother. She operates from the shadows, using Victor as her public face. It was her agents who followed me to London, though I managed to elude them. Then we must move quickly, Holmes declared, turning to Lestrade. Inspector, I suggest you arrange immediate transport for both Herr Schroeder and the sapphire to a secure location. Scotland Yard's headquarters would be most appropriate. And what of Esterhazy? I asked, gesturing toward the Count, who remained unconscious. He will face charges of murder and attempted murder, Lestrade replied firmly. I've already sent for additional officers. They should arrive shortly. Holmes shook his head. I fear that may be too late. If the Countess has indeed deployed multiple agents, they may already be watching the fairground. He turned to Madame Vasilenko. Is there a less obvious exit? A tradesman's route, perhaps? "There's a service path that leads behind the caravans," she replied. "It emerges near the eastern road, away from the main entrance." "Excellent. Watson, you will accompany Herr Schroeder and the Sapphire along this route. Lestrade will create a diversion by departing with Esterhazy through the main gate, drawing attention away from your escape." "And what of you, Holmes?" I inquired, concerned by his exclusion from either party. "I shall remain here briefly to examine something that has been troubling me about the Carousel." His expression was thoughtful. "There is still the matter of the music playing without the mechanism's rotation. Most curious." Madame Vasilenko stepped forward. "I will guide Dr. Watson and Herr Schroeder to the eastern path." As our group prepared to divide, a sudden flicker of movement beyond the carousel caught my attention. I reached instinctively for my revolver, but Holmes placed a restraining hand on my arm. "No need for alarm, Watson. That would be Miss Fairfax, one of the fairground workers. She has been observing us for the past 20 minutes from behind the shooting gallery." "How could you possibly—" I began, but Holmes merely smiled. "The reflection in the carousel mirrors, my dear Watson. Most revealing." He raised his voice slightly. "You may join us, Miss Fairfax. I assure you we mean no harm. To the carousel." After a moment's hesitation, a young woman emerged from the shadows. She was perhaps 25, with auburn hair partially concealed beneath a worn cap, and the practical attire of a fairground mechanic. "How do you know my name?" she demanded, approaching cautiously. "Your tools bear the initials EF and Madame. Vasilenko glanced in your direction several times during our investigations. You are clearly known to her." The young woman looked to Madame Vasilenko, who nodded reassuringly. "This is Emily Fairfax, Edward Thornfield's apprentice. She has maintained the carousel since his death." "Since before it," Emily corrected. "Edward's hands were too arthritic these past 2 years. He taught me everything about the mechanism." Holmes studied her with renewed interest, including how to make the music play without the carousel rotating. She hesitated, then nodded. "It's a modification Edward made years ago. He loved the music but sometimes wanted to hear it without operating the full carousel." "A useful skill," Holmes remarked, "one that has contributed to the carousel's reputation for supernatural activity, I imagine." Emily's expression darkened. "Those stories kept people away at night, gave Edward privacy to work on his modifications, and to search for the Emperor's star," Schroeder added. "He never told me what he was looking for," Emily said. "Just that the carousel held a secret worth finding." Our conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching vehicles. The police reinforcements Lestrade had requested. The inspector straightened his jacket and lifted the still unconscious Esterhazy with the help of his constable. "We'll proceed as planned," Holmes decided. "Lestrade, make your departure as visible as possible. Watson, follow Madame Vasilenko with Herr Schroeder and the Sapphire once the distraction is in place." "And you?" I asked again. "Miss Fairfax and I will conduct one final examination of the carousel. There are aspects of this case that remain unresolved." I recognized the gleam in Holmes's eye, the look that signified he had perceived connections, still invisible to the rest of us. Though concerned for his safety, I knew better than to argue when his mind was thus engaged. Our plan proceeded accordingly. Lestrade departed through the main gate with Esterhazy, creating a suitably conspicuous scene for any watching eyes. After allowing sufficient time for this distraction to draw attention, Madame Vasilenko led Schroeder and me along the promised service path, a narrow track winding behind the caravans and storage tents. We had progressed perhaps halfway to the eastern exit when a sharp crack split the night, unmistakably a pistol shot from the direction of the carousel. I hesitated, torn between our mission and concern for Holmes. "Go," Schroeder urged, seeing my dilemma. "I am safe with Madame Vasilenko. Your friend may need you." I needed no further encouragement. Pressing the Sapphire into Madame Vasilenko's Hands I turned and raced back toward the central plaza, my revolver drawn. The fairground's twisted pathways seemed designed to confuse, and by the time I emerged near the carousel, a second shot had sounded. The scene that met my eyes was one of chaotic struggle. Holmes was engaged in physical combat with a tall, elegant woman dressed in men's attire, her dark hair gathered beneath a gentleman's hat. Despite her feminine build, she fought with remarkable strength and precision. Emily Fairfax lay on the ground nearby, clutching her arm where blood seeped between her fingers. "Watson!" Holmes called, narrowly evading a vicious kick. "The Countess has decided to handle matters personally." Helena Esterhazy, for it could be none other, turned at the sound of my approach. Her aristocratic features were contorted with rage, but her movements remained controlled and deliberate as she produced a small derringer from her coat. I raised my service revolver, but before either of us could fire, Holmes launched himself forward, seizing her wrist. The derringer discharged into the air as they grappled. Using a technique I recognized from his studies of Baritsu, Holmes twisted the Countess's arm behind her back, forcing her to release the weapon. "I believe that concludes your family's interest in the Carousel, Countess," Holmes declared, maintaining his hold despite her struggles. "You have no idea what you've interfered with," she spat, her accent more pronounced in anger. "The Emperor's star is Habsburg property. Its theft has gone unpunished for too long." "The document we discovered suggests otherwise," Holmes replied, calmly. "A legal transfer signed by Archduke Franz Karl himself." "Signed under duress during revolutionary chaos," she hissed. "A worthless paper extracted by opportunists. A matter for courts to decide, not midnight assassins," Holmes countered. I moved to assist Emily Fairfax, finding her wound to be a painful but relatively minor graze. "The Countess surprised us," she explained through gritted teeth. "She was hiding inside the Carousel's mechanism when you left." "An old family talent for concealment," Holmes observed dryly, "though it seems the Esterhazy capacity for patience is somewhat less developed." Police whistles sounded from the direction of the main gate, Lestrade returning with reinforcements. The Countess ceased her struggles, a cold dignity replacing her earlier fury. "This is far from over, Mr. Holmes," she stated with aristocratic disdain. "The Habsburg reach is long, even in England." "Perhaps," Holmes acknowledged, "but considerably shorter from within a prison cell, I imagine." As Lestrade and his men took charge of the Countess, Holmes turned to me with a questioning look. "The sapphire?" "Safe with Madame Vasilenko and Schroeder," I assured him. They continued to the eastern exit. Holmes nodded, satisfied. "Then all that remains is to determine who else might have knowledge of the Emperor's star. The Esterhazy siblings are accounted for, but their resources suggest a more extensive operation." "You believe there are more agents?" I asked. Holmes's gaze returned to the carousel, its painted horses now still and silent in the moonlight. "This case began with a murder most theatrical in nature, Watson. Such elaborate staging suggests a mind of considerable dramatic inclination." He turned toward Emily Fairfax, who was now having her wound bandaged by a police constable. "Tell me, Miss Fairfax, did Edward Thornfield ever speak of an associate with connections to Viennese theater? Someone who might have helped design the Carousel's more performative elements?" Ellery, Chapter 7. The Performer's Secret. Emily Fairfax's expression changed at Holmes's question, her features registering surprise followed by wary calculation. She glanced at the constable tending her wound, then back to Holmes. "There was someone," she admitted. "A man who visited Edward several times over the past month. He claimed to be a theatrical designer from Vienna, interested in the Carousel's mechanisms for a stage production." Edward seemed both fascinated and disturbed by his questions. "This man's name?" Holmes pressed. "Hoffman. Anton Hoffman. He spoke with an accent similar to Herr Schroeder's but more refined. He wore expensive clothes and always carried an ebony walking stick with a silver handle. Holmes exchanged a significant glance with me. "Did you observe anything unusual about this walking stick?" Emily nodded. "The handle was shaped like a carousel horse. Edward commented on it during Hoffman's first visit, and the man claimed it was commissioned specifically to commemorate their meeting. A rather elaborate preparation for a supposedly chance encounter," Holmes observed. "When did you last see this Hoffman?" 3 days ago. He and Edward had a heated argument in Edward's caravan. I couldn't hear what was said, but Edward was shaken afterward. He told me to be careful around the carousel, that people would do anything to possess it." Holmes paced a small circle, his brow furrowed in thought. "The theatrical connection is most revealing. The staging of Thornfield's body on the carousel pole, impaled yet arranged to remain hidden until the mechanism had been operating for some time, speaks of someone with knowledge of dramatic timing and mechanical ingenuity." He turned back to Emily. "This Hoffman, was he a tall man, slender but strong, with a small scar near his right eyebrow?" Her eyes widened. "Yes. How could you possibly know that?" "Because, my dear Miss Fairfax, I believe we have encountered him already, though under a different name." Holmes turned to Lestrade, who had returned from securing the Countess. "Inspector, I suggest you telegraph to Vienna immediately. Request information on one Anton Hoffman, theatrical designer and possible associate of the Esterhazy family." "You believe this Hoffman killed Thornfield?" Lestrade asked, notebook already in hand. "I believe he is our third Habsburg agent, one who operates with greater subtlety than the Esterhazy siblings. He cultivated Thornfield's trust, learning about the Carousel's secrets, while posing as an interested professional colleague. When Thornfield discovered the golden cylinder and began to realize the Carousel's true value, Hoffman likely attempted to negotiate its purchase. The argument Miss Fairfax witnessed suggests Thornfield refused." "But why kill him in such an elaborate fashion?" I asked. "Surely a simple murder would have sufficed if the goal was merely to obtain the sapphire." Holmes shook his head. "Not if the location of the Emperor's star remained unknown. Hoffman needed to search the carousel thoroughly without arousing suspicion. What better way than to create a macabre mystery that would close the fairground, temporarily while focusing attention on the supernatural rather than the practical?" "The haunted carousel," Emily murmured. "The stories would only grow stronger after another death." "Precisely. And in the ensuing confusion, who would notice someone examining the carousel's mechanisms under the guise of investigation?" The theatrical presentation of Thornfield's body served multiple purposes. It eliminated the one man who knew the carousel's secrets while creating an opportunity to search for the sapphire. Lestrade looked skeptical. "This is all very well, Mr. Holmes, but it remains speculative. We have the Esterhazy siblings in custody, and Herr Schroeder has recovered his family's property. Case closed, I should think." "A premature conclusion. Inspector, the most dangerous player remains at large." Holmes turned suddenly to Emily. "The music, when did it begin playing tonight? Before or after we arrived at the fairground?" She considered for a moment. "After, I believe. I was working in the storage tent when I heard it start. That's what drew me to investigate." "And you didn't activate it yourself?" "No. I assumed one of you had somehow triggered the mechanism." Holmes's expression grew grave. "Then Hoffman has been here all along, observing our progress. He activated the music to draw us to the carousel, knowing we were close to discovering its secret." "But why would he want us to find the sapphire?" I asked. "He didn't. He wanted us to reveal the method of accessing it. Remember, Watson, Thornfield died before sharing the complete numerical sequence with anyone except perhaps Madame Vasilenko. Hoffman knew the sapphire was hidden somewhere in the carousel, but lacked the specific knowledge to retrieve it." A sudden thought struck me with chilling clarity. "Holmes, if Hoffman has been watching us all evening, Then he likely followed Schroeder and Madame Vasilenko when they left with the sapphire, Holmes finished, already moving toward the eastern path. Come, Watson. The game is not yet over. We raced through the fairground, following the service path Madame Vasilenko had shown us earlier. The narrow track wound between storage tents and workers' caravans before emerging onto a rutted lane that led toward the village. About halfway along this lane stood a small stone bridge crossing a shallow stream. As we approached, I could make out three figures in the moonlight. Madame Vasilenko and Schroeder facing a tall man whose ebony walking stick gleamed silver at its tip. As I suspected, Holmes muttered. Hoffman has intercepted them. We slowed our approach, moving more cautiously, to avoid alerting the Habsburg agent to our presence. From our new vantage point behind a hedgerow, we could hear their conversation. I have no quarrel with either of you, Hoffman was saying, his cultivated voice carrying clearly in the night air. Simply hand over the sapphire, and you may continue. On your way. The Emperor's star belongs to my family, Schroeder replied firmly. Legally transferred and documented. Documents can be disputed, Hoffman countered smoothly. Interpretations change with political winds. The Habsburg monarchy recognizes no such transfer. Yet you operate in secret, Madame Vasilenko observed. If your claim were legitimate, why not pursue it through diplomatic channels? Hoffman's laugh was cold. My dear lady, diplomacy is a slow and uncertain process. The current political climate makes official action problematic. My employers prefer efficiency to protocol. The Countess sent you, Schroeder stated. The Countess, like her brother, is merely one instrument in a larger orchestra. I represent interests that transcend individual nobles. He extended his hand. The sapphire, Herr Schroeder. I won't ask again. Holmes signaled to me, and we emerged from our hiding place, approaching from behind Hoffman. I believe the gentleman has made his position clear, Holmes announced. Though he neglects to mention his role in Edward Thornfield's murder, Hoffman turned, remarkably composed despite our sudden appearance. Mr. Holmes, I wondered when you would join us. Your reputation for timely interventions is well deserved, as is yours for theatrical murder, Herr Hoffman. Or should I say, Herr Director? Your techniques bear the unmistakable signature of the Vienna State Opera's former technical director, particularly your flair for mechanical timing and dramatic revelation. If Hoffman was surprised by Holmes's knowledge, he concealed it well. An interesting theory. Unsubstantiated, of course. The walking stick rather gives you away, Holmes noted. A custom piece from Lobmayer of Vienna, commissioned not for this assignment, but for a production of Der Freischütz 5 years ago. The carousel horse motif was part of your staging concept, rather innovative, by all accounts. Hoffman's expression hardened. You are remarkably well informed about Austrian theater for an English detective. I make it my business to be informed about many subjects, including the fact that you carry a blade concealed within that stick. Holmes's voice remained conversational, but I noticed his stance shift subtly into a defensive posture. Hoffman's hand tightened on the silver handle. Then you know I am not without resources, even when outnumbered. 4-1, I pointed out, my revolver now drawn. Hardly favorable odds, even for a man of your capabilities. Don't be so certain of your arithmetic, Doctor, Hoffman replied with a thin smile. I rarely work without understudies. At his words, 2 additional figures emerged from the shadows beyond the bridge. Men with the unmistakable bearing of professional soldiers, both armed with revolvers already drawn. Chapter 8. A diplomatic engagement. The night air seemed to freeze around us as Hoffman's 2 compatriots advanced, their revolvers gleaming in the moonlight. Their movements betrayed military training, precise, coordinated, and utterly without hesitation. I kept my own weapon raised, though the odds had shifted dramatically against us. A regrettable complication, Hoffman remarked, his tone suggesting it was anything but. Now, the sapphire, if you please. My patience, unlike this charming countryside setting, has definite limits. Holmes remained remarkably composed. Before we proceed to the inevitable exchange, I wonder if your employers would appreciate the diplomatic incident you're about to create. The murder of an English police detective, a distinguished Austrian citizen, and 2 British subjects would surely attract unwanted attention. Accidents befall travelers on country roads every night, Mr. Holmes, particularly in areas known for fairground ruffians and suspicious characters. Perhaps, Holmes conceded, though such accidents rarely involve victims carrying correspondence addressed to the British Foreign Office. Hoffman's expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. What correspondence? The letter I dispatched from the Silver Horse Inn before joining Watson at the fairground. It details this entire affair, including the Habsburg connection and your theatrical methods. I took the liberty of addressing it to an old acquaintance, Langdale Pike, whose position at the Foreign Office makes him particularly interested in matters involving European nobility. I struggled to maintain a neutral expression, knowing perfectly well that Holmes had sent no such letter. Pike was indeed a gossip-monger of Holmes' acquaintance, but his connection to diplomatic circles was tenuous at best. Hoffman studied Holmes carefully. A bluff, surely. A reasonable assumption, Holmes acknowledged. Though perhaps you recall observing me at the inn's writing desk while you watched from the common room, disguised as a commercial traveler. The gray suit and false beard were quite convincing, but the Austrian tobacco rather gave you away. This precise detail, which I suddenly recalled from our visit to the inn, struck home. Hoffman's composure wavered momentarily. Even if such a letter exists, it changes nothing, he declared, though with less certainty. The sapphire must be recovered. On that point we are in agreement, came a new voice from beyond the bridge. We all turned to see a distinguished gentleman emerging from a carriage that had approached silently along the village road. He was perhaps 60, impeccably dressed, in diplomatic attire, complete with several discreet decorations pinned to his coat. Baron Gruner, Hoffman acknowledged, surprise evident in his tone. This is unexpected, as is your theatrical production, Herr Hoffman. The Baron approached with measured steps, seemingly unconcerned by the drawn weapons. When Her Imperial Majesty commissioned the recovery of the Emperor's star, I believe her instructions specified discretion above all else. With respect, Baron, conventional approaches had failed. More direct methods became necessary. Direct methods? The Baron's voice remained level, but displeasure radiated from every syllable. A murdered fairground owner, 2 aristocrats in police custody, and now an armed confrontation with England's foremost detective? Your definition of discretion requires revision. Holmes bowed slightly. Baron Ludwig von Gruner, I presume? Austrian ambassador to the court of St. James. Your reputation for timely intervention rivals my own. The Baron returned the bow with equal precision. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, your reputation crosses borders, sir. I had hoped to make your acquaintance under more favorable circumstances. Holmes gestured toward Hoffman and his armed companions. Perhaps you might encourage your countrymen to lower their weapons? It would considerably improve the current circumstances. The Baron nodded to Hoffman, who hesitated before signaling his men to stand down. They complied, though remained vigilantly positioned. Now, the Baron continued, I believe we have a matter of significant historical and cultural value to discuss. He turned to Schroeder. The Emperor's star has been a point of contention between certain factions of the Habsburg court and your family for generations, Herr Schroeder. Schroeder clutched the sapphire protectively. My grandfather received it legally. The document confirms this. Indeed, a document signed by Archduke Franz Karl himself. The Baron smiled thinly. A legitimate transfer during a chaotic period in our history. However, The sapphire's cultural significance to Austria transcends mere ownership. It was worn by Empress Maria Theresa at her coronation, a symbol of imperial continuity, which makes it valuable beyond its material worth, Holmes observed. Precisely, Mr. Holmes. Its return to the imperial collection would be considered an act of tremendous goodwill. The Baron directed his attention back to Schroeder, one that would not go unrecognized or unrewarded. I could see Schroeder weighing his options, the sapphire heavy in his hand, both physically and historically. My grandfather refused considerable sums for this stone, he said finally. He believed its possession was a matter of honor. And what do you believe, Herr Schroeder? The Baron asked quietly. A moment of silence passed before Schroeder responded. I believe honor can take many forms. Perhaps the true value of the Emperor's star lies not in possession, but in resolution. Holmes nodded approvingly. Wisely considered, though I would suggest any such resolution include official recognition of your family's legal ownership and appropriate compensation. Naturally, the Baron agreed smoothly. Austria values both history and justice. A public acknowledgement of the Schroeder family's honorable custodianship, along with compensation befitting such a significant cultural treasure, would be arranged. And the matter of Edward Thornfield's murder, I interjected, unwilling to let justice be overlooked amid diplomatic negotiations. The Baron's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. A tragic affair that will be addressed appropriately. Herr Hoffmann's methods were unauthorized and exceeded his mandate considerably. Hoffmann shifted uncomfortably, his theatrical confidence diminishing under his superior's critical gaze. The British authorities will require someone to stand trial, Lestrade stated, having remained uncharacteristically silent throughout the exchange. Justice must be seen to be done. The Esterhazy siblings will face British justice, the Baron conceded. Their actions were undertaken without official sanction, motivated by personal ambition, as much as patriotic sentiment. As for Herr Hoffmann, he paused significantly. His diplomatic status complicates matters, but rest assured he will face consequences for his actions. Holmes studied the Baron thoughtfully. You knew about this operation all along. I was aware that efforts were being made to locate the Emperor's star. The methods, however, were left to subordinates who have proven overzealous. The Baron's gaze lingered on Hoffmann, who now stood rigidly at attention. A mistake I shall not repeat. Schroeder looked down at the sapphire one last time, its deep blue depths seeming to hold the history of two nations within. With deliberate calm, he extended his hand toward the Baron, the Emperor's star resting on his palm. For the honor of both our countries, he said quietly. The Baron accepted the sapphire with appropriate solemnity. Austria acknowledges its debt to the Schroeder family. The formal proceedings shall take place at the embassy tomorrow, if that is convenient. As this diplomatic exchange concluded, I noticed Holmes watching not the sapphire, but Hoffmann, whose expression betrayed complex emotions beneath his composed exterior. A satisfactory resolution, Holmes remarked as we prepared to depart. Though, I suspect this case has dimensions beyond what we have witnessed tonight. What makes you say that? I asked quietly as we followed the others toward the waiting carriages. Holmes gestured subtly toward the Baron, now engaged in hushed conversation with Hoffmann. Our theatrical friend reports to the ambassador, yet acted without his explicit approval. The Countess and her brother operated with resources beyond their apparent means. And a Habsburg sapphire, while valuable, hardly justifies such elaborate measures. You believe there's more to this affair than the recovery of a historical treasure? Holmes' eyes gleamed in the moonlight. The Emperor's star may be merely the visible facet of a much larger gemstone, Watson, one whose true nature remains to be revealed. Chapter 9. Shadows and Reflections. The following morning dawned with a clarity that seemed at odds with the mysteries of the previous night. Holmes and I had returned to London after witnessing the formal transfer of the Emperor's star into Baron's von Gruner's custody. Schroeder, accompanied by Lestrade, had departed for the Austrian embassy to arrange the details of his compensation, while Madame Vasilenko remained at the fairground to assist with its reopening. Holmes had been uncharacteristically silent during our return journey, his keen mind clearly preoccupied with aspects of the case that continued to trouble him. It wasn't until we were settled once more in our Baker Street lodgings, with Mrs. Hudson's excellent breakfast before us, that he finally gave voice to his thoughts. What we witnessed last night, Watson, was the visible conclusion to a diplomatic affair that has been unfolding in shadow for decades. Holmes pushed aside his barely touched plate and reached for his pipe. The Emperor's star was merely a convenient focal point, a tangible object around which more complex political maneuverings could crystallize. You believe the sapphire itself was not the primary objective? I asked, recalling his observations from the previous evening. Oh, it was certainly valuable, both historically and materially. But consider the resources deployed for its recovery. 3 separate agents operating on British soil, one of whom resorted to murder. Such expenditure suggests stakes beyond a single gemstone, however significant. Holmes tamped tobacco into his pipe with methodical precision. The timing is particularly suggestive. Why pursue the sapphire now, after decades of apparent indifference? Karl Schroeder received it in 1853. Yet only in recent months did Habsburg agents begin actively searching for it. Perhaps they only recently discovered its location, I suggested. A reasonable hypothesis, though incomplete. Holmes struck a match and applied it to his pipe. I believe the answer lies in current European politics. Austria-Hungary faces increasing internal pressures, nationalist movements, succession concerns, shifting alliances. In such contexts, symbols of imperial continuity become disproportionately valuable. He drew contemplatively on his pipe, sending a cloud of blue smoke toward the ceiling. The Emperor's star represents more than mere monetary worth. Its return to the Habsburg collections would be a powerful symbol of imperial authority reasserting itself, reclaiming what was lost during revolutionary upheaval. Our discussion was interrupted by the arrival of a telegram, delivered by a breathless Baker Street irregular. Holmes tipped the boy generously before unfolding the message. "From Lestrade," he announced, scanning the contents. "The Esterhazy siblings have been formally charged with conspiracy and attempted murder. However, as anticipated, Hoffmann has claimed diplomatic immunity and will be returned to Vienna under Baron von Gruner's supervision. He escapes justice for Thornfield's murder," I observed with some bitterness. "In the conventional sense, yes, though I suspect his punishment in Vienna may be considerably more severe than anything an English court might impose." The Habsburg court does not look kindly upon agents who create international incidents, regardless of their success. Holmes set aside the telegram and rose to gaze out our window onto Baker Street below. "There is another matter that continues to trouble me. Thornfield's murder was necessary from Hoffmann's perspective, not simply to silence him, but because he had discovered something beyond the existence of the sapphire." "What makes you so certain?" "The nature of the staging, Watson. The murdered man was found clutching a card bearing the message, 'The Carousel claims what is rightfully its own.' A theatrical flourish, certainly, but also a deliberate misdirection. Hoffmann wanted investigators focused on the Carousel's supposed supernatural elements, rather than its historical connection to the Habsburg court." Holmes turned back to me, his gray eyes alight with the intensity I had come to recognize as signaling his approach to a conclusion. "I believe Thornfield discovered not only the Emperor's star, but evidence of its true significance. Perhaps in those same documents he showed to Madame Vasilenko." Before I could respond, Mrs. Hudson announced the arrival of a visitor, Herr Wilhelm Schroeder. The elderly Austrian appeared considerably more composed than during our previous encounters, though fatigue still lined his distinguished features. "I hope I am not intruding," he began, accepting the chair Holmes offered. "I wish to express my gratitude for your assistance in this extraordinary affair." "Not at all," Holmes assured him. "I trust the diplomatic proceedings proceeded satisfactorily?" "Indeed. The Austrian government has been most generous in their compensation, and a formal acknowledgement of my family's legal ownership and honorable custodianship has been arranged for publication." The Baron was particularly insistent on the wording. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "A mutually beneficial resolution. Austria regains a historical treasure while acknowledging your family's legitimate claim, thus preserving honor on all sides." "Precisely." Schroeder hesitated before continuing. "There is another matter I wish to discuss, something I did not feel comfortable revealing while the sapphire's ownership remained unresolved." From his coat pocket, he withdrew a small leather folder containing what appeared to be several aged documents. "These were among my grandfather's papers, entrusted to each generation along with the secret of the Carousel. I had not fully understood their significance until recent events brought them into clearer focus." Holmes accepted the proffered documents with evident interest. The uppermost appeared to be a letter written in faded German script, dated 1848. As he scanned its contents, his eyebrows rose incrementally. "Most illuminating," he murmured. "A letter from Archduke Franz Karl to your grandfather, referring not merely to the sapphire, but to documents which, should they become public, would irrevocably alter the succession." Holmes looked up sharply. The Emperor's star was never simply a jewel. It contained something hidden within its setting. Schroeder nodded. "A miniature compartment concealed beneath the primary stone. My grandfather was instructed to remove the original contents and replace them with a small duplicate of the Habsburg family tree, marking the sapphire as authentic should it ever need to be identified." "And the original contents?" I inquired, now thoroughly intrigued. "Evidence of a morganatic marriage contracted by Archduke Franz Karl's eldest son, the future Emperor Franz Joseph, during the revolutionary chaos of 1848. A marriage swiftly annulled when the political situation stabilized and more advantageous alliances became possible." Holmes's expression grew animated as the pieces aligned. Hence the timing of this recovery effort. With the current emperor's health failing and succession questions increasingly prominent, any evidence of irregular marriages in the imperial line becomes explosively significant. "The Habsburg monarchy rests upon legitimacy and unbroken succession," Schroeder confirmed. "Even rumors of such documents would be destabilizing in the current climate." "Yet you did not mention this to the Baron," Holmes observed. "Some secrets are best left buried, Mr. Holmes. My family has kept this one for generations. The Emperor's star has returned to Vienna, bearing only a replica family tree within its setting. Whatever documents my grandfather removed have long since been destroyed, their contents known only through his cryptic notes." Holmes studied Schroeder with newfound appreciation. "A most pragmatic resolution. Though I suspect Baron von Gruner is not entirely convinced the matter is so neatly concluded, which is precisely why I wish to inform you of the full circumstances," Schroeder replied. "I anticipate continued interest from certain quarters, despite the official resolution." As our visitor prepared to depart, Holmes posed one final question. "The Carousel itself, what becomes of it now?" "It remains at Blackwood Fair, in Miss Fairfax's capable hands. Some heritage, Mr. Holmes, is best preserved through continued use rather than museum isolation. The Carousel was always meant to bring joy whatever secrets it once contained." Chapter 10. The final rotation. A week had passed since the resolution of the Emperor's Star affair. London had slipped back into its customary rhythms, the autumn chill deepening as November approached. Holmes had immersed himself in chemical experiments, seemingly content to let the matter rest. Yet I knew my friend too well to believe his interest had entirely waned. My suspicions were confirmed when Holmes looked up from his workbench one morning, a gleam of anticipation in his gray eyes. "I believe we shall shortly receive a visitor from the Foreign Office, Watson. Perhaps you might clear those journals from the chair by the fire." "The Foreign Office?" I asked, complying with his request. "Have you been corresponding with your acquaintance Pike?" "Not directly. However, the diplomatic ripples from our Carousel adventure continue to spread in interesting patterns." Holmes carefully stoppered a vial of pungent liquid and set it aside. "Baron von Gruner departed for Vienna 3 days ago, taking with him both the Emperor's star and Herr Hoffmann. The official narrative is one of complete resolution. A historical treasure returned. Appropriate compensation arranged. Justice served. Yet you believe otherwise?" "I believe diplomatic affairs, like carousels, operate on multiple levels simultaneously. Some mechanisms remain hidden from casual observation." The doorbell's sharp ring interrupted our conversation. Moments later, Mrs. Hudson announced Sir Philip Marchmain from the Foreign Office. Our visitor was a distinguished gentleman of perhaps 50, immaculately attired in the understated manner of career diplomats. His carefully neutral expression revealed nothing, though his eyes, shrewd and observant, marked him as more than a mere bureaucrat. "Mr. Holmes," he began once introductions were complete, "your involvement in the Blackwood Fair incident has placed you in possession of information that concerns Her Majesty's government." Holmes settled into his chair with the air of a man anticipating a familiar dance. "I presume you refer to the Habsburg succession implications rather than the mere recovery of a sapphire." Sir Philip's expression registered brief surprise before returning to diplomatic impassivity. "You are as well informed as your reputation suggests. I merely follow logical chains to their conclusions. The extraordinary measures employed for the sapphire's recovery suggested motivations beyond its material value. Herr Schroeder's subsequent revelations confirmed these suspicions." "Then you are aware of the documents once concealed within the Emperor's star?" "Documents concerning a morganatic marriage contracted by the future Emperor Franz Joseph during the revolutions of 1848. A politically inconvenient union swiftly annulled when stability returned." Holmes steepled his fingers. "What interests me is why the British Foreign Office should concern itself with Habsburg dynastic matters dating back 4 decades. Sir Philip studied Holmes carefully before responding. "Anglo-Austrian relations exist within a complex network of European alliances, Mr. Holmes. Stability in Vienna serves British interests, particularly given current tensions with Russia in the Balkans and Ottoman territories. And you fear these documents might destabilize the Habsburg succession at a critical juncture," Holmes concluded. "We seek assurance that this matter is truly concluded. Schroeder claims the original documents were destroyed generations ago, but Habsburg agents continue to operate with remarkable urgency for a case supposedly resolved." I recalled Holmes' earlier observation about the Carousel's music playing mysteriously to draw us to the fairground. "You believe someone else is searching for these documents?" Sir Philip nodded. "Our intelligence suggests Countess Helena maintained correspondence with Russian agents sympathetic to pan-Slavic movements within the Austrian Empire. Should evidence of imperial irregularities emerge, certain factions would benefit considerably from the resulting instability." Holmes rose and paced to the window, pipe in hand. "The official record states that Schroeder's grandfather destroyed the original marriage certificate and related correspondence. Only his cryptic notes remain, documenting their contents without providing actionable evidence." "And you believe this account?" Sir Philip pressed. "I believe Wilhelm Schroeder to be a man of honor who values resolution above personal advantage. Whether his grandfather exercised similar discretion is less certain." Holmes turned back to our visitor. "However, your concerns may be misplaced. Even if documents survived, proving their authenticity after 40 years would be extraordinarily difficult." "Unless there was a witness," Sir Philip countered. Someone whose testimony could corroborate their contents. Holmes's expression sharpened with sudden interest. You have information suggesting such a witness exists? We have reports that Anton Hoffmann, before his involvement with the Esterházy siblings, visited a retired Habsburg lady-in-waiting, now living in Eastbourne. Magdalena Kinski, age 76, formerly attached to the household of Archduchess Sophie, Franz Joseph's mother, a potential witness to the 1848 marriage, Holmes murmured. Most intriguing. And you believe Hoffmann's theatrical Carousel production was actually a cover for locating both the documents and this witness. We believe the Habsburg involvement had multiple objectives, Mr. Holmes. The Emperor's star was merely the most visible. Holmes contemplated this information, absently tamping fresh tobacco into his pipe. Have you spoken with this Magdalena Kinski? She died 3 days ago. Natural causes, according to local authorities, though the timing is disquieting. Her personal papers were reportedly destroyed in a small fire the same evening. Convenient, Holmes observed, though consistent with a thorough resolution from the Habsburg perspective. Sir Philip leaned forward. What I require, Mr. Holmes, is your assessment. Is this matter truly concluded, or should we anticipate further complications? Holmes struck a match, taking his time to light his pipe before responding. The visible aspects are certainly resolved. The Emperor's star has returned to Vienna. The Esterházy siblings face British justice, and Hoffmann has presumably received whatever diplomatic censure awaits him. The Carousel remains at Blackwood Fair, stripped of its secrets. He exhaled a thoughtful cloud of smoke. Yet certain elements suggest continued interest from multiple parties. Baron von Gruner's careful wording of the official acknowledgement, Hoffmann's visit to a potential witness, the Countess's Russian connections. These speak of contingency plans and competing agendas. Then you believe the affair continues? Sir Philip pressed. I believe, Sir Philip, that matters of dynastic succession rarely conclude neatly. However, with the sapphire returned, the witness deceased, and any surviving documents lost to history, I see little likelihood of immediate complications. Holmes paused, his gaze distant. Unless, of course, there was another copy of the marriage certificate, one hidden neither in the sapphire nor among Schroeder's papers, but concealed elsewhere by someone anticipating future need. You suspect such a copy exists? Sir Philip asked sharply. I merely observed that prudent conspirators create redundancies. Karl Schroeder was, by all accounts, a master craftsman who built intricate mechanisms with multiple fail-safes. Holmes smiled faintly. But speculation without evidence serves no useful purpose. For now, I believe you may report that the Carousel has completed its final rotation. After Sir Philip's departure, I turned to Holmes. Was that assessment entirely candid? You seem to hint at additional possibilities. Holmes had returned to his chemical apparatus, but his expression remained thoughtful. The diplomatic waltz, like the Carousel's music, follows certain established patterns, Watson. Some questions are best left unasked officially, allowing all parties to maintain necessary fictions. And unofficially? Unofficially, I find myself wondering about Emily Fairfax's remarkable expertise with the Carousel's mechanisms and her close relationship with Edward Thornfield. The apprentice often inherits more than mere technical knowledge. Holmes adjusted the flame beneath a beaker of bubbling liquid. However, some mysteries are perhaps best left unresolved. The Emperor's star has returned to Vienna. Justice has been served for Thornfield's murder. And the Carousel continues bringing joy to fairground visitors, haunted now only by the echoes of its extraordinary history. Chapter 11. Echoes of the waltz winter had settled over London by the time our involvement with the Carousel affair had faded into memory. Holmes had immersed himself in new investigations, a blackmail case involving a prominent parliamentarian, and a curious matter concerning stolen architectural plans. While I had returned to my medical practice, the demands of seasonal ailments keeping me thoroughly occupied. It was, therefore, with some surprise that I returned home one evening in early December to find Holmes dressed for an evening out, a theatrical program in his hand. "Ah, Watson, excellent timing. I've secured 2 excellent seats for tonight's performance at the Royal Opera House. Der Freischütz, a particularly fine production, by all accounts." "Opera, Holmes? I had no idea you harbored such cultural inclinations." A cryptic smile played across his lean features. "This particular production holds elements of interest beyond mere cultural appreciation. The technical direction is reportedly most innovative." Understanding dawned. "Hoffman? Indeed. It seems our theatrical murder designer has resumed his legitimate career following whatever diplomatic consequences befell him in Vienna. Most curious, wouldn't you agree? That evening found us seated in an excellent box overlooking both stage and orchestra pit. The production was indeed remarkable, featuring elaborate mechanical effects that transformed the stage from idyllic forest to supernatural abyss with breathtaking efficiency. During the intermission, Holmes directed my attention to a tall, slender figure conferring with stagehands near the curtain. "Anton Hoffman," he confirmed. "Evidently his Habsburg employers value his talents sufficiently to overlook his recent indiscretions. Or perhaps his theatrical skills serve purposes beyond mere entertainment," I suggested. "A most perceptive observation, Watson. The line between stagecraft and statecraft often blurs, particularly in Vienna." As we watched, Hoffman was joined by another familiar figure, Baron von Gruner. The 2 men conversed briefly before disappearing backstage. "The diplomatic corps attends the opera," Holmes remarked, "though I suspect the Baron's interest extends beyond cultural patronage." Following the performance, Holmes suggested we take a brief detour before returning to Baker Street. Our hansom cab delivered us to the Diogenes Club, that peculiar institution where London's most unsociable solitary thinkers gathered in rigidly enforced silence. "My brother Mycroft should have concluded his evening routine by now," Holmes explained, as we were shown to a private room. "His perspective on our Habsburg adventure may prove illuminating." Mycroft Holmes, even more analytically brilliant than my friend, though entirely lacking in his energy or ambition, received us with his customary blend of fraternal affection and intellectual impatience. "The Emperor's Star affair," he pronounced, after Sherlock had outlined our recent experiences. "A neat resolution on the surface, though the undercurrents continue to eddy in interesting patterns." "You've been monitoring diplomatic communications?" Sherlock inquired. Mycroft's substantial form shifted slightly in his chair. "Vienna has been unusually active in certain channels. The official return of the Sapphire was marked with considerable ceremony, a clear statement of Habsburg continuity and authority. Most effective symbolism. And the succession concerns? Temporarily stabilized. Though I note that 3 minor archdukes have recently embarked on extended foreign tours, a diplomatic way of removing potential complications from the immediate vicinity of the imperial court." Sherlock leaned forward. "And the Countess Helena?" "Officially disavowed by the Habsburg court and sentenced to a nominal period of house arrest at her estate near Salzburg. Unofficially, she continues to maintain certain correspondence that interests several European intelligence services." Mycroft's expression conveyed volumes. "Russian interests in the Balkans remain particularly active." "I suspected as much. The Countess struck me as someone whose contingency plans would have contingency plans." Sherlock's fingers drummed thoughtfully on the armrest. "And what of Blackwood Fair? Has there been any further Habsburg interest in the Carousel?" "None. That has crossed my desk," Mycroft replied, "though I understand the fair itself has enjoyed unprecedented popularity following reports of its haunted attraction." "Nothing attracts the public like a mysterious death and rumors of the supernatural," I observed. "Human nature remains predictably unpredictable," Mycroft agreed with his characteristic detachment. As we departed the Diogenes Club, I noticed my friend had fallen into one of his contemplative silences. It wasn't until we were nearing Baker Street that he spoke again. "I find myself wondering about Emily Fairfax," Holmes mused. "Thornfield's apprentice has inherited not only his carousel, but potentially his knowledge. The question remains whether she also inherited his secrets." "You still believe there might be another copy of the marriage certificate?" "I believe, Watson, that someone who dedicated their life to maintaining a carousel built specifically to conceal Habsburg secrets may have ensured those secrets would not die with him." Holmes gazed out at the foggy London streets. The true craftsman always includes fail-safes in his designs. 3 days later, a small package arrived at Baker Street, postmarked from the village near Blackwood Fair. It contained a handsomely carved miniature carousel horse and a brief note. "Mr. Holmes, the carousel continues its rotations, bringing joy to visitors young and old. Edward would have wanted it this way, beauty and motion concealing careful craftsmanship. Some secrets," he always said, "are best preserved through open display, hiding in plain sight where only those with proper understanding might recognize their significance." The black stallion has been restored to its rightful place, though Kaiser now bears a silver star upon his forehead, a small addition that I believe enhances his imperial bearing. Should your investigations ever bring you back to our fairground, the carousel awaits your return. Its music plays each evening at sunset, a tradition I maintain in Edward's memory. With gratitude for your discretion, Emily Fairfax. Holmes examined the miniature horse with his characteristic thoroughness, eventually discovering that its wooden base could be rotated to reveal a tiny compartment, empty but lined with faded velvet. "A message in itself," Holmes remarked, replacing the horse in its wrapping. "Some truths remain in motion, visible yet untouchable, like the painted steeds of a carousel." "Do you think she has the documents?" I asked. "I think, Watson, that Emily Fairfax understands the value of keeping certain possibilities in careful reserve." Holmes placed the package in his desk drawer. "The carousel's final secret may be that its mysteries never truly end. They merely continue their rotation, emerging into the light before vanishing once more into shadow." Some months later, I noted a small item in the court circular announcing that a British technical delegation would visit Vienna to advise on the renovation of the Prater amusement park. Among the delegates was listed Miss E. Fairfax, mechanical specialist in historical fairground attractions. When I showed this to Holmes, he merely smiled and returned to tuning his violin. As evening fell over Baker Street, I recognized the melody he began to play, the flowing, hypnotic strains of the Blue Danube Waltz, its cadences rising and falling like the horses of a carousel in perpetual, mesmerizing motion. Chapter 12. The Viennese Connection. Spring had swept through London, bringing with it renewal that seemed to infuse the very soul of the city. I had seen little of Holmes in recent weeks, as a particularly virulent influenza epidemic had demanded my full professional attention. Upon returning to Baker Street one mild April evening, I found our sitting room transformed into what appeared to be a miniature museum of carousel memorabilia. Newspaper clippings, photographs, and diagrams covered the walls. Upon the table lay mechanical drawings of remarkable precision, while a partially disassembled music box occupied Holmes's chemical workbench. "Ah, Watson," Holmes greeted me from behind a stack of leather-bound volumes. "You find me in the midst of what might be considered an academic postscript to our Blackwood Fair adventure." "I had thought that matter concluded," I remarked, surveying the organized chaos with amazement. "Cases end, Watson, but their implications often continue to unfold in fascinating patterns." Holmes gestured toward a newspaper bearing the masthead of the Vienna Gazette. "I've been corresponding with certain continental contacts regarding the Habsburg family's historical connection to mechanical amusements. This sudden interest in carousels strikes me as unusual, even for you, Holmes," he smiled cryptically. My interest lies not in the amusements themselves, but in their capacity to serve as elegant hiding places. The carousel represents a perfect metaphor for certain types of diplomatic intrigue. Continual motion that ultimately returns to its starting point, all accompanied by music designed to distract from the mechanism beneath. Holmes indicated a particular photograph, an aristocratic gathering around what appeared to be a garden carousel, considerably smaller than the Blackwood Fair attraction but similar in design. The summer palace of Archduke Franz Karl, 1847, Holmes explained. Note the similarity in the decorative elements to our Blackwood carousel. Both were crafted by Karl Schroeder, whose commission extended beyond mere entertainment. I studied the photograph more carefully, noting the figure Holmes indicated, a craftsman standing proudly beside his creation, surrounded by Habsburg nobility. "Is that the Archduke himself?" I asked, pointing to a distinguished gentleman at the center of the group. "Indeed, and beside him, his son, the future Emperor Franz Joseph." But observe the young woman standing somewhat apart from the main group. I followed Holmes's direction to a figure partially obscured in the photograph's edge. A young woman of evident beauty, but dressed more simply than the surrounding nobility. Who is she? According to my research, one Elise Weber, daughter of a respected Viennese physician. She is mentioned in contemporary accounts as an accomplished musician who performed at several Habsburg gatherings during this period. Holmes lifted another document, what appeared to be a church registry. She disappears from Viennese social records in late 1847, only to reappear in 1849 as the wife of a minor government official. The intervening period coincides precisely with the revolutionary upheaval of 1848. You believe she was the subject of the morganatic marriage mentioned in Schroeder's documents? The evidence suggests this possibility, Holmes replied, his tone deliberately measured. More significantly, certain Habsburg correspondence recently made available to researchers makes oblique references to the Weber matter being satisfactorily resolved in mid-1848. Holmes shifted his attention to the mechanical drawings on the table. But what truly captures my interest is Karl Schroeder's ingenuity. These technical specifications, kindly provided by his grandson, reveal that he created not one but 3 carousels during this period, each incorporating similar, hidden compartments. 3? I exclaimed. Then the Blackwood carousel was not unique? Not entirely. One remained at the Habsburg Summer Palace until it was destroyed in a fire in 1853, conveniently after the sapphire had been officially transferred to Schroeder's possession. The second was reportedly sold to a Russian nobleman, though its subsequent whereabouts remain unclear. And you believe these additional carousels might also contain hidden documents? Holmes steepled his fingers. I believe Karl Schroeder was too methodical a craftsman to rely on a single repository for materials of such significance. The Habsburg insistence on recovering the Emperor's star now makes greater sense. They needed to ensure all potential copies of the marriage certificate were secured. Our conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Hudson announcing a visitor, a well-dressed gentleman who introduced himself as Mr. Harold Wintersmith of the British Museum. "I've come regarding your inquiry about our Habsburg music box collection," he explained once pleasantries were exchanged. "A most specific request. We do indeed have the item you described, acquired in 1887 from the estate of Magdalena Kinsky." Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "The Habsburg lady-in-waiting who died in Eastbourne." "The very same. Her collection of Habsburg memorabilia was quite remarkable for a lady of relatively modest means. The music box in question is currently in our restoration department. Might it be possible to examine it?" Holmes inquired. "That's precisely why I've come in person rather than sending a letter. The box contains a rather unusual feature that our restorers discovered only yesterday. A false bottom concealing what appears to be a sealed envelope." Holmes was on his feet in an instant. "I should very much like to see this envelope." I thought, "You might. It bears instructions that it should be opened only in the presence of a qualified solicitor and a representative of either the British or Austrian diplomatic service. "Most intriguing," Holmes remarked. "Has anyone been notified of this discovery?" "Not as yet. Museum protocol requires thorough documentation before such notifications. However, given your known connection to certain diplomatic circles, I thought it prudent to consult you first." After Wintersmith's departure, Holmes paced our sitting room with barely contained energy. "The third repository, Watson. Magdalena Kinsky was no mere lady-in-waiting but a deliberate custodian. The music box plays the same waltz as the Carousel, the Hey, Blue Danube, a musical key to unlock historical truth. But surely the document's existence will soon become known to Habsburg agents," I observed. "Indeed, which explains Miss Fairfax's timely invitation to Vienna. The British Foreign Office moves its pieces into position as this new development unfolds." "You believe Emily Fairfax is working for British intelligence?" "I believe, Watson, that Emily Fairfax inherited more than a carousel from Edward Thornfield. His decades maintaining the Habsburg secret likely involved connections to interested parties on both sides." Holmes picked up the miniature carousel horse she had sent us. This was no mere souvenir but a message, confirmation that she holds pieces of this historical puzzle and stands ready to deploy them as circumstances warrant. "Then the game continues," I remarked. "The diplomatic waltz plays on," Holmes agreed, "with Britain, Austria, and Russia, all following steps choreographed decades ago. The Habsburg monarchy's legitimacy, the stability of Central Europe, the balance of power, all potentially influenced by documents hidden within a provincial fairground attraction." Holmes returned to his violin, once again drawing forth the flowing melody of the Blue Danube. "The carousel continues its rotation, Watson. Secrets emerge into the light, then vanish again into shadow. Music plays, horses rise and fall, and at the center of it all stands the fixed column, the immutable truth that all parties seek to control." The waltz filled our sitting room as evening descended over Baker Street, its familiar cadences somehow imbued with new meaning, each note a turning cog in the intricate mechanism of European diplomacy, each phrase a horse on the great carousel of history, endlessly circling yet never truly completing its journey.